The couple in love went out for a walk at a slow pace, eating delicious ice cream along the way. They were both so happy about this, because in fact, due to a huge pile of things to do, they hadn't gone on a date for a long time, and finally, they could just walk around like this and not think about anything. But unfortunately, these thoughts were interrupted, as was this wonderful atmosphere, and this was done by a huge truck that drove off the road and began to roll over right on top of the couple. The guy didn't think for long and reacted quickly. He pushed his girlfriend to the side and exposed himself to the blow. A huge truck was falling right on him, and at that moment, all the wonderful moments of his short life passed him by. He decided that it would be better if he did not see this, so at the last moment he closed his eyes, and just 1 moment later, he opened his eyes again and was very surprised. He was lying in some place that was incomprehensible to him and was thinking that he had just been hit by a truck. It was hard to believe. Just like the fact that he seemed to have broken his neck, and apparently now he couldn't move because of it. Panic immediately gripped the guy, as thoughts began to appear in his mind that he might remain like this forever. He began to look around, and this distracted him for a moment because he saw a rather strange picture. There were a lot of people around him who died in the fire. The guy couldn't fully understand what was happening to him. It seemed to him that maybe it was just a dream. But all the action happened so realistically, and it was too cruel for an ordinary dream. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted when he heard a strange sound behind him, as if someone had approached him. When he turned his head, he saw an old man there who was telling him something about how it seemed like he was the only one who could survive this horror. The strangest thing at that moment was that the old man spoke in Chinese, but the guy still understood him. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to the reflection in the eyes of this old man. There, he saw a little boy. This scared him quite a bit, because he couldn't even imagine why he looked like a little boy. In any case, no matter how much he screamed, the old man still picked him up and was ready to take the guy with him. After some time, they were already running away from this city, and along the way, the man told the boy that he was most likely different from the other residents of Chunjin. But apparently he said all these words with a negative note, because the boy continued to scream even when there was no particular reason for it. At one point, the boy became quiet. The reason for his calmness was that the guy noticed the uniqueness of the person who was currently carrying him in his arms. The whole point was that apparently this old man had some kind of superpowers, thanks to which they moved quickly, and then even jumped from a high cliff. The boy thought until the end that at one moment they would fall and break, but after a while, it became clear that the old man was in control of the situation. After landing, the old man noticed that the baby was no longer crying, for which he praised him. Next, he carefully placed his hand on the baby's body, and the boy's entire body began to be enveloped in a pleasant warmth. All the snow around them began to melt, and all this because the man was emitting a huge amount of thermal energy. But his thoughts ended there, because he didn't have much energy and he constantly wanted to sleep. So at some point, he simply passed out. When he woke up, he noticed that they were already in a completely different place. A man holding a baby in his arms stood in front of a huge building in the mountains, which could not fail to impress. The old man was apparently a rather respected person here, because as soon as they saw him, they immediately began to greet him and ask how his journey had gone. He didn't tell them the details of the trip, but simply said that everything was fine, and then he wanted to know if anything bad had happened in his absence. According to them, nothing of the sort actually happened. At least they had nothing to report. And when the old man heard this, he remarked that there must have been nothing better he could have heard. After which he himself added that he did not bring any news, but he needed to meet with the master. But at the moment, what they were most interested in was what kind of child was in his arms. Although the old man did not want to say anything about it yet, the only thing he could say was that Chunjin would take care of him. One of them suggested that this baby was the same as Kun-san, but Sabina immediately assured them that this was not so, and that the fact that he found him was pure chance and nothing more. After which he went to the temple, which he had been heading to from the very beginning. On the way there, he told the kid that this was the Janam clan, once one of the 9 strongest, but unfortunately, the time of this clan had already passed. The boy in the mind of this child looked around carefully, because he was quite curious to watch how life flowed here. But some moments were quite surprising for him, because at first it seemed that they were engaged in martial arts, but then it became obvious that this was not entirely true. In any case, it was safe to say that it was simply amazing. Sabina, looking at this little boy, immediately noticed that the boy had a rather conscious look. And he actually liked it very much, for which he praised the boy. After some time, he came to the right place, where there were a lot of books, so it vaguely resembled a library. And as soon as he entered, he was immediately met by his student, who was very glad to see his master. The old man didn't say a word to him in response, but only through the very same child he had brought with him at the guy. The boy was quite scared when he was simply abandoned, but fortunately the old man's student successfully caught the boy, after which he carefully examined the baby, not understanding what he should do with him next. The old man finally decided to explain to the boy what all this meant, and he started from afar, namely, with the fact that as far as he knew, the boy did not yet have his own student. The guy was quite scared, because he understood where this was all going, but the man just continued to laugh at him. And when he finally came close to him, he asked the guy to make this kid his student. At that moment, the boy was just trying to understand what they were talking about and what it meant to make him their student. But over time, from their conversation, he realized that he would probably study martial arts here for the rest of his life, and this scared him quite a lot. For the next few days, the boy was with the guy, so they began to get used to each other little by little. Gonchan, that's exactly what they started calling the baby now, which he clearly didn't like very much, but it's still better than nothing. What bothered him more was that he had no desire to become a master at all, especially when he heard about the conditions. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted when the guy started feeding him, and the food was, to put it mildly, not the best. The boy thought that Gonchar was very hungry, so he tried to feed him as best he could, but the boy ate like a baby bird, which was a little scary. At that moment, the potter was thinking only about surviving in this world, because doing so with such food would be incredibly difficult. However, despite the fact that the food was disgusting, Gonchar immediately noticed that the person with whom he would now live was quite nice. The only problem that prevents him from living a normal life is the fact that he cannot speak. Therefore, it is quite difficult for him to convey his desires correctly, especially when he does not like something, or, for example, when he needs to go to the toilet. The potter simply shouted and tried to convey his wishes in this way, but the guy simply could not understand what was going on. The screams continued until the evening, and no matter how hard Gonchar tried, he couldn't even say a word. Only crying came out. After such a small experiment, he finally calmed down a little and stopped screaming, which could not but please his master. Besides, as soon as the boy calmed down, the master decided that while they had the opportunity, they should practice a little. After a while, there was absolute silence in their room, which made Gonchar think that what he wanted most now was to talk, but so far he had not been able to do so. He was also incredibly interested in learning what his master was doing, because he had been sitting in one place for a long time. Was this really how he meditated? The potter also decided to try something similar and began to breathe in the same way as his master, and it was worth noting that he was quite good at it. And the result of such meditation was that at one moment, Gonchar was finally able to say his first word in this life, which immediately attracted the attention of the master. He tried to talk to the baby and find out from him whether he really said something, or whether he just misheard it. At that moment, the potter was thinking that at first he was just breathing, and then suddenly something changed, and in order to say the cherished words again, he just needed to concentrate and repeat what he had just done. The kid understood that most likely he had just used his energy, the same as the old man had used then. Therefore, gathering all his energy into a fist, he tried to say the word again, but unfortunately, he was unable to do so, and all he was capable of was making sounds. Gonchar simply did not understand what he was doing wrong, and why he was unable to speak if he had just done it. Without waiting for the kid to do it again, the master decided that he was just imagining things, so he decided it was time for him to go about his business. Gonchar decided that he needed more practice in speaking, and then he would definitely be able to start talking, and everything would be fine again. After this decision, he lay on the bed for quite a long time and concentrated his energy. But he became so carried away by this process that at some point he simply began to roll out of his bed. At the last moment, he managed to hold on, and now thoughts appeared in his head that energy training allows one to develop faster, and if he can continue in the same spirit, then he will most likely grow much faster. But for now, he had a slightly different problem, which was that his head was much larger than his body, which is why he simply could not roll back onto his back. Because of this, over time, he developed breathing problems. So he decided that the best thing to do in this situation was to use energy to solve this problem. This was noticed at one point by the young master, who immediately ran up to the boy because he understood that this was clearly not normal and that he could suffocate. But he still managed to lift Gonchar in time, who immediately took a deep breath. After this, the master noted that he had just seen the baby meditating, which was pleasant to realize, but most likely, for now, Gonchar was simply repeating after him. On the other hand, looking at this little boy, the master found it strange to observe such a thing, because the boy clearly did not look like a genius. However, this did not change the fact that the boy was still a great fellow, and at this rate, he would definitely be able to become a scientist. After a while, they both stood by the window and just watched as small snowflakes slowly fell on the trees. Exactly 2 years later, little Potter was playing near a tree with small stones. At least that's how it looked, because in reality, he was trying to concentrate the energy in his hands. And he did this in order to break this stone into small pieces in one moment. This process remained noticed, because his young master saw it, so he immediately began to run in his direction. The man seemed to go crazy when he saw what little Potter was doing, because he immediately started running towards him. As it turned out, the master thought that the little boy had destroyed the stone only to put it in his mouth later, which is why he ran to him so quickly. But when he took his little hand, it turned out that the man was completely mistaken in his assumptions. The Potter simply turned him into sand, which calmed the man down a little, but he still decided to repeat to the boy once again that neither stone nor sand should be put in the mouth. The boy looked closely at his teacher and smiled, while mentally thinking that he probably shouldn't talk about what kind of energy he had just used. When Gonchan turned 7, he began to train even harder, and thanks to this, he could do quite complex techniques with ease. His movements became better and better every day. He began to master quite complex techniques. But even after so many years of living in this place, the guy still could not believe that all this was real. But what struck him most was the fact that the energy moved after the body. He was even able to compress this energy in his hands, and this was already called honing his skills, which he improved more and more every day. Therefore, on one of those days, his teacher came out to him and told the boy that he needed to go to the Tappen Temple the next day. According to the man, the boy was already 7 years old, so it was time for him to start training, which Gongchan clearly didn't expect to hear. The master had once told him that in order to find the right path, one should take care of one's people, and Gongchan assumed that he was telling him about begging for the glory of Buddha. Gongchan understood perfectly well that most likely they would simply give him a sword and send him off to wander, and he had also heard that hermits cannot die or be wounded. That's why the master sends him to the lands of the Chonam clan, where he will be able to see the world, because it is still dangerous for him to go to other places alone. After all, now Gongchan's main goal, in the opinion of his teacher, is to become the best master on the continent. But the boy clearly did not want such a life, because masters do not even have the right to marry. The teacher, in response to these words, laughed at him and told him that in fact, in their Chonam clan, it is possible to marry, so there is simply nothing to worry about. Gongchan himself understood perfectly well that he started quite early. Therefore, being at the 3rd level, he was already reaching the 4th, although the age difference would still be noticeable. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted when he raised his eyes and saw a beautiful girl walking straight towards him. But what surprised the guy most was when the girl came closer to him and spoke first, asking him a question that she wanted to make sure of, or was he really that same Zhong? He just stood and looked at her attentively. She took this as consent, so she also introduced herself and said that her name was Gonin. After which he finally came to his senses a little, and immediately said that he was very pleased to meet her, but still, he wanted to first know how she knew his name. In response to this question, Gonin immediately told him that she had come here specifically to take him with her. Gongchan immediately blossomed like a flower and thought that he would find this temple quite interesting. So he followed her without any problems, not thinking about who this girl was and what she really wanted from him. And as soon as they arrived at the place where the girl was leading the guy, she immediately threw him a stick. Gongchan didn't quite understand what was going on and why she gave him this stick. Gonin laughed in response and finally told him that in fact everything was simple. They were going to train now. Gongchan was a little surprised, but still accepted this fact, after which he wanted to know what kind of circle it was, and according to Gonin, she drew it as boundaries. And since they were both aware of what was about to happen, the girl suggested that he start immediately. Gonchan was a little scared when he saw how well she wielded the stick, because he still thought it was an ordinary old stick. And when she struck him for the first time and tore his clothes, the guy immediately decided to remind her that they were training. Gonin seemed to not hear him anymore, because she continued to generate 1,000 blows in 1 minute, and although Gonchan knew how to fight, he still could not block her blows. The girl immediately noticed this, so at one point she simply stopped. At first she looked at the boy, and then decided to tell him that he did not know the basics at all, and as soon as she told him about this, Gonchan immediately admitted that this was his first time participating in a fight. Gonin was a little surprised by this, because she was sure that he knew how to block attacks. But the guy continued to stand and look at her intently, which provoked her to start showing him how he should block this or that blow. Gonchan looked at her with such a loving gaze, and therefore he managed to quickly memorize all the blows that the girl showed him. But no matter how closely he watched her, he still couldn't keep track of everything at once, so he asked her to show him a few techniques again, to which Gonin quickly agreed. To begin with, she showed him once again what he would have to fight back, and the girl's speed could not help but surprise him. After which, she jumped up and began to attack Gonchan again. But this time, the guy was more than ready for such a development of events, and thanks to his speed, he was able to dodge the blow. This gave him a little confidence in himself, which made him start to think that he would definitely be able to defend himself against her. And while he was so confident in himself, he suggested to Gonin that they immediately move on to battle, where he would finally show her what he was really capable of. Although Gonin thought that the guy had become so confident too early, she still didn't mind, and immediately accepted his challenge. And just a moment later, she was in front of the guy and was striking him. Although Gonchan didn't expect such speed from the girl, he still managed to block this blow. But he decided not to stop there, and as soon as he had the opportunity, he immediately decided to take advantage of it and launch a counterattack. Gonin immediately noticed that this boy was quite talented, since he caught on so quickly, even though he didn't even try to understand the essence of the fighting style. But suddenly, he just stopped and did not continue to attack her, although it seemed that he could get her. But according to the guy, at the most important moment, he froze and did not have time to think what to do next. Gonchan felt a little ashamed because he couldn't think of it and attack. Gonin immediately noticed that this boy looked quite like a genius, although his movements were sluggish, but his head was quite good. In any case, Gonchan quickly offered the girl to continue training because he was more than ready for it. She didn't mind, so she quickly agreed to it, and they started training. 2 whole years have passed since then, and Gonchan has grown quite well, and sparring with Gonin was much more interesting. The guy himself believed that the essence of martial arts was a clash of 2 minds, so he was in no particular hurry to rush into battle. But when Gonin got close enough to him, the guy finally started fighting her, and he was doing quite well. The girl was happy with her student's progress, but still, she was not going to give up so easily, and after he repelled all of her standard attacks, she decided to show him another rather interesting technique. She had built up quite a bit of speed before this, and as soon as the chance appeared, she jumped straight at Gonchan with her punch. The guy clearly didn't expect this, so he couldn't dodge in time, and this led to him receiving a blow from the girl. However, as it turned out later, he was still able to dodge, and he was not as badly hurt by this blow as it might have seemed at first glance. The girl immediately noticed that the guy was very lucky, a little more, and he would have definitely gotten it. After these words, she decided that it was time for her to fight Gonchan seriously, so the number of blows she delivered in 1 second increased almost 5-fold. Of course, Gonchan felt this, but he was still able to withstand and even block these blows. But Gonin wasn't going to stop there, and immediately after a short series of blows, she was again next to the guy and ready to deliver the blow that would end their fight. Gonchan was a little scared, so he didn't have time to block the blow properly. Instead, he accidentally put his hand in front of the blow, which caused a fairly large amount of energy to be released from his body after a few seconds. Gonin couldn't believe that the guy used a shield that blocked all her attacks. According to Gonchan, he just used a defensive technique from his old style. If you believe the guy, this technique is simply ideal in close combat. If you use the 2nd, 6th, and 9th forms in turn. It sounded so strange to the girl, so she decided to ask again what exactly he meant, and, according to the guy, she would have to use a new style to connect. After which, he decided to show her an example of how it should look, because if you start rotating energy from one center to the second, that could make a pretty good shield of pure energy, which the guy just used again. He was so glad that he had not yet forgotten after so much time how to use this method correctly, because it seemed to him that it had a direct relation to the old style. However, he was not entirely sure of this, because it seemed to him that the new style was a bit intrusive, and the learning process should be continuous. Gonen couldn't believe that the boy was saying such words at 9 years old. Was he really that conscious at such a young age? In any case, she really liked it, and she was also pleased that the guy learned such things from her in such a short time. Gonchan, in response, assured the girl that in fact, this is not all he can do, and now is the time to show her how much he has grown during this time. Gonen tried to convey to the boy that, in fact, all his strikes were pretty much the same, and he should change his strategy. But first she decided to beat him up a little, so that he didn't think that he had learned absolutely everything that was possible. Gonchan clearly didn't expect this. He thought he had really developed enough to feel confident in such a fight, but he still took quite a few hits. But the girl was not going to stop there, and immediately after a series of blows, she jumped high enough to deliver a kick. It seemed like it was bad enough for Gonchan, but he was mentally confident that he could escape this blow. But everything was not as simple as it seemed to the guy. The blow was quite strong, which even threw him back a little. This surprised the guy a lot, because he was sure that his defense was at an ideal level. How did this even happen? He immediately decided to stop this fight and ask the girl how she managed to break through the defense, to which she confidently answered him that she used air superiority. Gonchan didn't quite understand what they were talking about, so the girl told him that he had learned all of her attacks and how to defend against them, and that she, having control over space, was capable of more extraordinary moves. And if we were to simplify all these words, we could say that he couldn't defend himself because he simply memorized everything. She noticed that he was a little upset, so she immediately asked him not to lose heart because she thought that he was only 9 years old, and she was 20. These words suddenly made Gonchan jump up and run somewhere, before he asked Gonen to wait here because he needed to think about her words a little. She tried to stop him and ask him again where he was running and what he wanted to do, but the guy didn't hear her and just kept running. After which she told herself that the boy was incredibly capable, because even taking into account the fact that she used a new technique, he still managed to erect a barrier. That same evening in the library, Gonchan was trying very hard to find something in the books. He wanted to find the techniques that Gonen had told him about today, namely air dominance. He needed the basics in order to understand how Gonen fought. But to his great regret, the results were rather disappointing, and a whole year had already passed. During this time, he trained quite a lot and tried to improve his skills to the maximum, but even with this approach, she still managed to get to him. His thinking ability during the fight was simply superb, but it still did not allow him to defeat his opponent. Even when it seemed to him that he was about to deliver a strong enough blow, the girl deceived him and struck back. Each of their training sessions ended with the girl saying that the training was good enough, but she simply couldn't help but notice that he was still powerless against a fighter who uses air energy. Gonchan tried not to show it, but it upset him incredibly much, because in his head he had thoughts that perhaps this was his limit and he could no longer become stronger. One such evening he decided that it would be better for him to go to bed than to think about such things. And as soon as the candle burned out, he thought about the fact that in the old style there was a way to relieve stress. To do this, he simply needed to focus on his energy and fill his inner cup to the brim with it. Suddenly, all these thoughts made him think that he was using the energy foundation, and in this way he could try to defeat Gonen. The next day, early in the morning, they went out to train again, and the first thing Gonchan told his opponent was that he had mastered the technique of dominance in the air, which Gonen did not really believe, because he was just a kid who was not even 10 years old. Although since he was so confident in himself, Gonen was more than ready to test these words. He immediately began to show her everything that he had learned over the past few days, and the girl immediately noticed that the boy was showing her something that was not what she expected to see. Gonchan immediately told her that he understood this perfectly well, because he had actually combined the power of energy flows with the old style, which is why he had come up with something new. Gonen couldn't understand at all what was going on here, so Gonchan decided to just show her. Then, according to him, everything would be clear. The girl didn't just stand there and immediately decided that it would be pretty good if they saw how similar their techniques were, and for that, she immediately went into battle. But as soon as she decided to strike, Gonchan's defense worked this time, and the girl was unable to inflict enough damage on him. She couldn't test this, so she continued to strike blow after blow, trying to break through the guy's armor. At this moment, the old man watched them closely and thought that Chongjin had actually raised a good student. Gonin couldn't stop and continued to strike blow after blow. It seemed to her that this was just some kind of nonsense. This quickly angered her, so she decided to deliver one of her strongest blows. But even he couldn't overcome Gonchan's defense. Moreover, the guy was even able to deliver a good counterattack. Gonin immediately thought that she had greatly underestimated the boy, but he managed to exceed all her expectations. But she wasn't about to give up yet, because she actually still had one way left that might be able to break through his defense. She began to concentrate energy under her feet, which at one point caused the ground to begin to collapse. So she was going to forcefully open his defenses. This was Gonin's special skill, which she used to defeat quite a few opponents. It was distinguished by its power and appearance, because every time she used it, a tiger appeared behind her, which instilled fear in its prey. Even such powerful attacks could not penetrate Gonchan's defense, although the girl put an incredibly huge amount of energy into these blows. But at one point, her efforts finally yielded results. Her hand was able to pass through Gonchan's defense, and it seemed that this was where it would all end. The old man had been carefully watching their sparring the entire time and understood perfectly well that at that moment, Gonchan was using a special kind of concentrated spiritual energy. But even he was surprised by what Gonchan, who was only 9 years old, was able to do. He deliberately let the girl get closer to him, after which he launched a counterattack on her. And he didn't stop there either, because right after he pushed her away from him, he launched another attack at her, after which he happily added that the basis of the girl's technique was different from his skills, but he still couldn't help but notice that the form was somewhat similar. At that moment, Gani only wanted to know how the guy managed to do something like that. Gonchan suggested that she calm down and end the training, and only after that would he be happy to explain to the girl how he was able to create this kind of protection. The next day, Gonchan, together with his teacher, headed to the elder, although neither of them even guessed why they were going there at all. Although the man still guessed what was going on here, it seemed to him that his faithful student had become famous throughout the school, and that this was precisely why they were going to the elder, something that Gonchan himself found hard to believe. After some time, they finally approached the temple where the elder was, and his assistant immediately announced to the old man that Chongjin and his disciple Gochan had arrived. As soon as they entered, the first thing they saw was the elder, who was actually quite hospitable. After which he noticed an interesting thing, that he often had to meet with Chongjin, but he would be talking with his student Gonchan for the first time, and as soon as the old man said these words, the little boy, as he was taught, greeted the elder and thus showed respect. However, the surprises did not end there. After they finally met, the elder asked Chongjin to leave them, and he asked the little boy to sit down so that they could talk in a comfortable atmosphere. The boy was quite surprised, and the old man immediately noticed this, noting that the boy was apparently interested in knowing why he had summoned him, which Gonchan himself immediately confirmed. The old man began by saying that he had been told that he was a very worthy and mature young man beyond his years. The old man called Gonchan because he would really like to test his strength, but first he wanted to ask the boy something. His question was that he wanted to know, or did the boy know, what the Energy Foundation is? Gonchan thought for a bit, and when he had collected his words, he finally said that this is a single, large connection that not everyone has. He also believed that it connected his consciousness with the surrounding world, creating a continuous flow of energy. The old man wanted to clarify, or the guy was saying that this foundation essentially connects him to the world, and, according to Gonchan, perhaps this energy doesn't just connect him, but makes him a part of this world, and he clearly feels it when the energy flows through his hands. And as soon as the boy finished speaking, one could confidently tell from the old man's face that he was incredibly surprised. He immediately thought about the fact that the galaxy is polite and eternal. It patronizes everything living and dead. He also thought about the fact that in the end, any energy flows into her huge, smooth flow, and it was precisely this kind of knowledge that the old man had been searching for all his life. After some time, Another old man entered the room with the elder and the boy, who first of all decided to note that he did help Elder Gongchan. The elder didn't think long before saying that this boy was special and that Sabika wouldn't mind listening to his speech either, although Sabika in turn didn't understand at all what this could change. By this time, Gongchan was already asleep, and so the old men spoke to each other rather quietly. When Sabika talked to his brother, he decided that he needed to leave one last instruction to Gongchan, and for this, he came closer to him. After some time, an incredibly strong concentration could be noticed between Sabika and Gongchan, and according to the old man, he was simply unable to cope with his energy, so he had to seal it. Then he fell to his knees and began to talk about how when the time came to remove this seal, he would have to guide this boy on his true path. According to Sabika, this child is the future of their clan, and the most important task at the moment is to take care of him, so that this does not happen to them. Well, with that, he announced that his time was up, and he simply could not do anything else. Quite a lot of time has passed since then, and Gongchan has grown quite a lot. At 16 years old, this guy had a strong body and spirit, and most importantly, a great desire to train. By this time, he was capable of quite serious things. He collected energy in his hands in incredible quantities. He even learned to use his internal energy in such a way that he could create objects with his energy. With the help of this ability, a little later, he was able to achieve that he began to create a shield, which he called the Chi Shield. Everyone around was incredibly surprised by how brilliant this guy was and how he could do everything on the fly, and they were also confident that if they trained as hard as they could do the same. Suddenly, today's training was interrupted at one point by one of the temple workers, who came out to inform Gongchan that they wanted to see him at the Temple of External Affairs. This confused the guy a little, because he couldn't even imagine why he was suddenly needed in this temple. It seemed like he hadn't done anything wrong. In any case, he had no other choice, so he decided to go to this temple, where they were already waiting for him. The temple worker said that they had an urgent matter and there was no one who could handle it, but Gongchan didn't understand at all what they were talking about. But instead of any explanation, this man could only say that Chongjin already knew everything, so Gongchan could also move forward. All these riddles scared the guy, because he didn't even know where he needed to go or go. The worker of this temple nevertheless decided to tell the guy that they would have to meet with the team and help them deal with the mountain bandits. The guy just stood there for a while, because he didn't understand what to do next with this information, and the man could only wish him good luck in the fight. Gongchan understood that he simply had no other choice, so he bowed and said that he understood everything perfectly. Immediately after he left this temple, he decided to go to his master, with whom they would apparently carry out this task. After some time on the road, Gongchan decided that he urgently needed to get something to eat. At that moment, all he could think about was China, because he really liked the delicious delicacies they made there. Therefore, he went down the mountains as quickly as possible, where there were a lot of people, and that meant a lot of different food. He immediately felt an incredible smell, which made him understand that soon his stomach would rejoice. Besides, he had not been here for so long that he had forgotten this wonderful aroma. However, on the other hand, he remembered that he lived the life of a recluse who could not even go out to eat. Before he stayed here, Gongchan decided that he needed to find a small place to stay for the night. The best option, he believed, would be to simply ask the locals for help, which is what he did. And as soon as the guy started talking about housing with one of the local residents, he immediately came closer to Gongchan, because he actually recognized him, because this is the same guy from Mount Chanam. The man was incredibly surprised that he had met Gongchan here at all, so he was happy to help the guy. Gongchan assured the man that his request would not be difficult, because he only needed to know where Tail's overnight stay was, and from the man's expression, it was clear that only spies did not know this place. To get there, the man decided to explain it to the guy literally using his fingers, but then he realized that this would be of little use and decided to draw the exact route. Gongchan was incredibly grateful to his new acquaintance for giving him such a detailed explanation of where he actually needed to go. After that, they finally parted ways with the man, and the first thing Gongchan thought about was that the masters were clearly held in high esteem here, which couldn't help but make him happy. After some time, Gongchan finally arrived at the right place for him, where he first greeted his brothers. Among his brothers were Jinjok-san, brother Huang and Hyun, and brother Hong, if Gongchan remembered the names of each of them correctly. They confirmed his guesses and said that he had not made a mistake with the names. And then, one of them noted the fact that although they had heard that he was the youngest, they could not even imagine that he would be so small. But it was all a joke, and he decided to introduce himself again, calling himself Huang, or as they call him, the Fast Sword. Then, Jin came closer to him and told the guy that they had received information that their older brother had been specially kicked out of their squad in order to take the gifted young man, and apparently they were talking specifically about him, to which Gongchan could only laugh. However, the situation was serious, according to the elder brother. They are aware of the situation, and they must go to Seokchon. According to their information, there is a tail unit there, which is responsible for transportation and security. The essence of their task will be that they will need to clear those places of bandits. Listening to his brother attentively, he still decided to find out a little more about their rivals, but in response, he was told that it would be better for them to discuss this on the way. The whole point of this task was that the matter was incredibly urgent, and they could not delay it any longer, so Jin would be ready to answer all questions on the way. After some time, they finally arrived at the place they needed, where the main one was called Hensu. This same Hensu immediately ran out of his house and shouted that his name was Hensu and that he held the position of local manager here. The brothers began to introduce themselves one by one, and Jin was the first to do so, then Huang, and finally Hyun. They also did not forget to introduce Gongchan, who, according to them, came to them from the main temple. Hensu couldn't believe his eyes that he was seeing something like this, because he had never seen a master from the main temple before. It was such a rarity. Moreover, Hyunsu immediately thought that this was the same Gongchan about whom so many rumors were circulating throughout the country. As soon as he greeted all the masters, Hensu immediately asked them to wait a little. According to him, they were still preparing rooms for the guys, and while they were doing this, the man decided to find out the reason for such a sudden arrival. And when Jin started telling him, at first Hyunsu couldn't believe it. It seemed to him that it was simply impossible. After which they entered Hensu's house, where he began to tell them that he had recently heard a conversation between some vagabonds. They were saying that it was not the mountain robbers who were behind this. Jin didn't want to believe it, because according to his information, they were the ones doing it, so he really wanted to know who was to blame for all of this. Hensu thought for a bit and finally decided to tell them that everyone around them suspected the Moists first and foremost. Now there was surprise on Gonchan's face, because before this, he had already heard some things about the Mohists. His older brother Jin also noted that if the Moists were really doing this, then the situation was becoming much more serious, and they might not be able to deal with them alone. Suddenly, his words were interrupted by Gongchan, who wanted to know one thing. Were these Moists really so strong that they wouldn't even try to stop them? In response to his words, Huang decided to tell the young student that he apparently did not understand that being a Moist was already quite a serious feat. After which he immediately added that he really did not want to belittle their school, but even the most senior level of mastery of the school cannot compare with a 16th generation Moist warrior, even taking into account the information that among the Moists, there are only 2 such strong warriors. He continued to talk about the Heavenly Horse Magen and the Bloody King Sakcheon. That is the name of these 2 masters. And if we talk about how strong these 2 are, then we can only tell one story. That several years ago, one of them, without anyone's help, moved against 100,000 strong Mongolian army. And another cut the throat of their Khan. After that battle, no one remained alive among that huge army. And if we were to sum up this story, we could say with confidence that this is how they got their nicknames. This means that they are unlikely to be able to resist them, because they are at least adherents of the old style, and in their school there are only 8 generations. They will not have even a few warriors who can compare with them. Gonchan sighed heavily, and all this was because he understood the seriousness of the situation and how much stronger their opponents were. After such a terrible story, the elder brother Jin decided to calm them all down and first suggested visiting Haoman. If they want to figure everything out on their own, they should hurry, but first, they need to get a good rest. In the local forest, there were several people who were saying that anyone can say that he is weak, because in fact, he is a tiger. However, at that moment, they did not know what to do next, although one of them was sure that they needed to retreat. Although they didn't want to forget that their tactics had worked and they could actually try to move further in this direction. But for now, they also had an open question regarding the man from the Jonam clan, who was a third-generation disciple of Gongchan and the 3 swords from the provincial temples. In that case, they weren't entirely sure that they would be able to get rid of them at all, because the guy might show himself, and then they would clearly have a hard time. But all this talk was empty space, because one of them reminded that the leader told them not to deviate from the plan. Although even here, everything was not so clear-cut, because if you think about it, the head recommended them more than ordered them, so it can be said with confidence that the final decision remains with them. Then they started to offer different options, and in one of them, they wanted to simply finish them off and only then retreat. Besides, we shouldn't forget that they've already made it clear to them who they are, so it would be nice to play with them one last time. The next morning, Gongchan woke up from a deep sleep. He was incredibly scared, and most likely, the reason was that he had a very scary dream. His first thoughts after waking up were ambiguous, because he was not sure that he should interfere with this mission at all, because such strong opponents were too much for the first mission. But on the other hand, he did not forget that this was his job, and he could not escape from it. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted when he heard a strange noise outside the door, and then he remembered that his elder brother was in Haomen, and it seemed that he had just returned. And as soon as Gongchan opened the doors, he heard the guys talking about how they should immediately all get together and discuss everything. After a short story from elder brother Jin, it became clear to them that not even the slightest trace remained of their enemies. He stated that they acted quite unexpectedly, so it seems to him that they simply ran away. And then Huang decided to find out where the package was. But here, Jin had already brought good news, because according to him, he had determined the location, and now their main task was to return the package, and they must do this as soon as possible. Although it was not yet clear how exactly they would do this, and then Jin spoke again, saying that they had sold it, so they had no other choice but to buy it again. They didn't quite understand why he was telling them all this, because they still couldn't figure out where that very package was. According to Jin, this package was on the west coast, and so it was not difficult to guess that they were there today for the purpose of sale. Jin confirmed this information and also added that the Mohist's power was truly secret and powerful. But because of this incident, many of them disappeared, so Shanxi province would be calm for a while. Han didn't quite understand why these moists were destroying everything around them when they wanted to get something, because it clearly wouldn't work the way they wanted it to. After that, Jin decided that their preparations were officially complete for today, and tomorrow they would finally set out on their journey. But first, they collectively decided that it would be best to send a letter to the main temple so that they could take at least some measures. They all left, but Huang asked the newcomer to stay for a while. He did this in order to offer Gongchan to drink some tea with him, or something stronger. At that moment, Gongchan remembered that in his past life, he often drank with friends, but in this life, this would be the first time for him. They sat down at the table, and Gongchan decided to immediately say that since he was drinking for the first time, he would like to start small, which Huan did not quite like, but still, he did not forbid him anything. Gongchan also couldn't help but mention that he had spent a lot of time in his life meditating, so he simply didn't have time for nonsense. These words made Huang think that the newcomer was trying to be rude to him, but he liked it. Gongchan did not hide this, and noted that this was far from news in the main temple. But suddenly his words were cut off out of the blue, after Huang, for no apparent reason, simply passed out and fell onto the table. Because of this, Gongchan had to carry his older brother in his arms. At that moment, Gongchan could think that no matter what happened, he could not abandon his brother. But at some point, his thoughts were interrupted, because he heard a rather strange noise, and immediately realized that there was clearly someone around. However, he didn't have time to do anything before he and Huang fell into a trap, which is why he immediately realized that they wanted to lock him here. The guy hadn't yet had time to do anything, when suddenly a man appeared in front of him, who first of all wanted to know whether the guy's name was really Gongchan and whether he was definitely from the Chanam clan. Gongchan understood what would happen next, but he still spoke to this guy with a smile and answered his questions quite confidently. After which, as expected, these few warriors who appeared in front of him jumped up and started running towards him, shouting at the same time that he must die today. Gongchan wasn't going to just stand there and watch them destroy him, but first, he carefully placed his brother Huang on the floor. After which, he immediately began to create a small circle of protection that should help them. For one of his opponents, it was quite surprising to see the guy resist at all. However, Even in this case, he did not think for long, and therefore, without much thought, struck the guy. But all this was useless, because as soon as he struck, he was immediately thrown back, and he did not even scratch Gongchan. However, this did not upset him, but on the contrary, he decided to talk to the guy and find out from him what he thought was the reason they attacked him. Gongchan didn't even guess why they did this, but on the other hand, he understood that he shouldn't think about it now, because two people were already attacking him at once. So he began to actively gather energy in his hands, and as soon as his opponents got close enough, he attacked them in response. His strike was based on pure energy, which literally pierced the men's bodies through and through. Thanks to this, he was able to knock them out. They lay unconscious, and Gongchan was pleased that he was able to defeat such strong opponents. On the other hand, he understood that these guys had no chance from the very beginning, although he was ready to admit that they scared him a little. Gongchan approached his brother to pick him up again, and along the way he realized that Huang was feeling very ill. But suddenly, the guy's body was filled with a feeling of fear, which scared him very much. He turned around and noticed that there were weapons in the bodies of these raiders, and this could only mean one thing, namely, that there was someone else here. And what's most unpleasant is that Gongchan immediately realized that these guys were finished off on purpose, and this was done so that they wouldn't say anything unnecessary. There was only one place where one could die at the hands of one's own brothers, and Gongchan understood this perfectly well. The boy and Huang returned to the village, and the first thing Gongchan did was tell this story to his older brother Jin, who, in response to this story, noted that they did not expect Gongchan to be so strong, which was incredibly nice to hear. However, Jin still asked the guy to be extremely careful, because there was very strong energy here. It would be incredibly difficult to survive, and Gongchan actually understood this perfectly. After which the older brother turned to Huang to remind him that in this place, he clearly should be more careful and not drink in the back, because his life could depend on it. As, for example, happened today. Upon examining the two attackers, they discovered that they had used a fairly strong poison. Jin immediately told them all that the moists were using him for self-destruction, which meant that it was most likely them. And once they were convinced of this, Jin immediately decided that they should send another message to the main temple. And mentally, he tried to understand why these guys suddenly decided to attack Gongchan. What was it about this guy that interested them so much? But in any case, whatever the reason, one can say with absolute certainty that the guy's life is in danger in this case, and apparently he was sent here for a reason. Several days later, the boys still hadn't managed to find any traces of the moists, but rumors of their appearance quickly spread throughout the area. At the same time, the talented master Gongchan became an equally interesting topic for discussion. And at one point, the time came to say goodbye, which saddened Gongchan a little, because he was very pleased to be with his brothers, from whom he was able to learn quite a lot. However, they felt that they had failed to teach him anything worthwhile, so they hoped that they would still have a chance to correct this. Gongchan asked them not to worry about this, and also assured them that he would look forward to their next meeting. They let him go without any problems, while thinking that they really had no reason to worry about this guy. On the way home, the only thoughts in the guy's head were that everything had been returned to the main temple. The enemies had disappeared without a trace, and he was returning to practice. He also thought that he would be able to study for a while with his brothers from another school, but unfortunately, he was unable to do this, and because of this, he was upset. But he did not grieve for long and immediately began to think about where it would be better for him to go. His first idea was Muji, a town about which many legends are told. The only downside was that it was located quite far from here. After some time, he finally made up his mind and set out on his journey through the woods. And his first stop was when he finally came out of the forest, which had pretty much battered him. At that moment, his biggest dream was to eat some rice soup and then get into a soft bed where he could sleep soundly. All these thoughts made him take a short break, and first he would really like to see what he had taken with him on this trip. He had quite a lot of things in his kit. For example, he took rice, noodles, and dried zucchini with him. But suddenly he noticed that he had forgotten the most important thing, namely the flint with which he was supposed to light a fire in order to cook himself some food. This made him think of his past life, where he was a big fan of barbecue, and since that was the case, he started thinking that maybe it would be nice to reminisce about the good old days. He found a small board and a stick, which he began to rub vigorously, trying to make fire in this way. But unfortunately, he had no success in this matter, although in fact he had never done this himself before. In his past life, waiters did this. However, he was not going to give up, because he understood that friction creates heat, and then it must turn into flame. And since he was in another world, he decided that he needed to try it in a different way. Gongchan decided that it would be nice to add chi energy to friction, so it seemed to him that he could do it faster. He began to gently summon energy to his fingertips, causing the wand to spin much faster. During this exercise, Gongchan noticed that he had managed to create spiral energy, which meant that he could, in theory, do without wood. And he was absolutely right, because this is how he managed to create a fairly strong flame. Gongchan was very glad that he still managed to light this flame, although it is not the flame of truth. In any case, he can cook food on it, so Gongchan did not care so much. About 10 days had passed since that evening, and Gongchan still could not reach the very destination that he needed so much. His condition was not as good as he would have liked. He was incredibly tired. He wanted to eat and sleep. Suddenly, on his way, he met a small hare who was simply walking through the local fields. Gongchan, looking at this hare, saw not an animal, but delicious food that he would gladly eat now. Therefore, without thinking twice, he ran after the hare to catch it and roast it quickly. But no matter how hard Gongchan tried, he still couldn't do it. But his work and efforts paid off, and at one point he finally managed to catch the animal. Although everything was not as good as it seemed to Gongchan, although he managed to catch this hare, he miscalculated a little and fell off the cliff. He didn't fall for long, and when he finally landed, he was incredibly pleased that he had managed to catch this hare, and all that was left was to make a fire. However, there was another problem that Gongchan faced, namely, that this hare seemed too cute to him. The potter himself could not believe the fact that this rabbit had somehow charmed him, because now he simply would not be able to destroy it. So he decided that he would just let the hare go and wish him luck. The potter could only hope that the next stranger would also spare him. Suddenly he heard a cow mooing nearby, and this could only mean one thing to the guy. There was a village somewhere nearby. But the problem was that even hearing this sound, he still did not understand where this village was, in the east or in the west. However, he was quite lucky, because he decided to go east, and with every step he heard the cow mooing louder and louder. The first thing Gongchan did after entering the village was visit a local cafe, where he ordered 5 servings of fried beef and the same amount of fried chicken as well as dumplings, and only after that was he able to eat his fill. The workers at this cafe couldn't believe at first that one guy could eat all of this on his own, and then they were shocked that he ate it all so quickly. But of course, what they were most worried about was whether this master would be able to pay for all of this. Now Gongchan understood why they were looking at him so intently, so he immediately decided to assure them that he had money, and there would definitely be no problem with payment. At least that's what it seemed to him, because as soon as he reached into his pocket, he realized that his money had simply disappeared. Gongchan began to realize that he must have dropped his wallet while catching the hare. At that moment, his thoughts were interrupted by the chef of this cafe, and he wanted to ask him first of all about payment, because they began to suspect that the chef was not going to pay them. At that moment, Gongchan was thinking only about the fact that he simply could not allow the masters to become associated with the thieves of rice and other products. Therefore, he decided to allow himself one small audacity, namely, he asked the owners whether they handled everything in their cafe. The owner of this establishment got very angry and started showing the guy his muscles, saying that the master could get out of here. But his wife suddenly stopped him, saying that they would not let him go for now because she had one good idea. Within a few minutes, Gongchan was writing out prescriptions to anyone who wanted them and giving advice. He also didn't forget to repeat that if they ordered a portion of dumplings from the owners of this place, Gongchan would give them a discount and write a talisman practically for free. In the Chonam clan, he learned to read and guide a person's path in the right direction. He also mastered Chinese medicine and learned how to attract good luck. Of course, no one knows for sure how reliable all this is, but it was absolutely clear that this makes people feel much better. Gongchan tells them how to avoid evil deeds and how to commit good deeds so that fate does not punish them. He lived this way for some time, but it couldn't go on like this for long, and as soon as he paid off his entire debt to the cafe owners, the guy decided it was time for him to continue his journey. The ambassador of the Shaolin Temple, talking to his interlocutor, tried in every possible way to prove one thing. But in response, all his interlocutors remained silent, so he had to remind them that they had ignored the words of the main temple. However, they still remained silent, which made the man very angry, so he began to speak rudely to them, which they did not like, so they answered him that it was too much. One of them noted that, without any evidence, they should speak out in favor. After these words, the temple ambassador could not contain his emotions and began shouting that people around him were being destroyed, and they were talking about some kind of evidence. He asked them to stop with this, because he was sure that they had already started to act, but the main problem was not even this, but something else. Other people who were also at these gatherings began to understand that the ambassador was telling them about representatives of 3 external sects. He confirmed this information and added that they say that not only the moists have appeared, but also the Temple of the Sun, the Ice Palace, and the Trinity of the Southern Gates have begun to stir. The Temple of the Sun, all that is known about it, is that it is the main sect of the deserts. They practice resistance to high temperatures. The Ice Palace, located in the north, teaches martial arts of snow and ice. The Southern Gate Trinity, the Poison Gate, the Beast Gate, and the Blood Gate are the names of those who divided power over the southern lands. Each of them is eager to obtain the Sichuan province, so the gate representatives are constantly fighting with each other. After this, the ambassador was asked who their leader was. He looked at the person who asked this question, and instead of answering, he decided to ask him in return, why are they asking him this question at all? According to the man, he is an ambassador, leading their meeting, so he is obliged to answer all the questions they ask him, whether he likes it or not. The ambassador thought for a moment and then said that he would like to recommend Namgun to them because it seemed to him that the glory of the Sword King spoke for itself. The king of the sword Namgung Muja, there is no one who can compare to him, except perhaps the ambassador, but he himself nominated the king. At the moment, the 4 strongest ones are Dan Chonggi, Namgung Muja, Jai Galsan, and Yu Mangu, although the latter was already too old, so he decided that he would not take part in all these races for the championship, especially since in his opinion there are many young and promising people who deserve it more than he does. As for Jai Galsan, he went missing some time ago. In this case, no one had any objections, but first they decided to ask Namgung himself what he thought about this choice. Namgung didn't know what to answer, but decided to first note that it was a great honor for him. However, he still admitted that he could not refuse the ambassador, and that he would take over the leadership post with all determination. Thus, the members of the ancient Murim Association elected the Sword King as their leader, and meanwhile, the sect of villains, sensing the approach of difficult times, created the Helserin organization. Meanwhile, Gonchan, continuing his journey, thought that he needed to earn some more money, otherwise he had squandered everything. But on the other hand, he bought a new uniform. The old one no longer looked like clothes, and in this new one, he was more than comfortable. In any case, he was in a great mood and continued to enjoy his journey, singing songs along the way and thinking about how incredibly comfortable it would be for him to train in a comfortable uniform. The only problem he had was hunger, so he decided at one point to stop and cook something to eat, and tomorrow he would quickly get to the nearest village. He prepared himself a delicious meat porridge with dried meat and was ready to eat it. Suddenly, he heard a small explosion, which made him stop eating and think that apparently, even here at night, someone was restless. Not far from Gonchan, in the forest, a woman fought with robbers and she was noticeably losing. One of them kept telling her that the best thing for her would be to just give up, and then they would end it there. But in response, she could only smile, and then she even called them crazy, because in the whole world, they cannot find someone who would willingly want to please them, so they run through the forests after the poor woman. Gonchan clearly didn't expect to see such a scene here, but what angered him most was that these men were pestering her. They did not hold back in their words, so they said that they would first destroy her, and then play with her corpse. But the girl did not run away. Moreover, she took out her sword and was ready to defend herself as long as she had the strength to do so. At some point, Gonchan jumped out in front of her and decided to help the poor girl. Without thinking twice, the guy used one of his most powerful skills, which he called Instant Moon. So he literally blew away all those guys and didn't let them get any closer. They didn't fully understand what kind of powerful technique this was, and most importantly, why did student Chanam interfere with this at all? Gonchan looked at their leader and, as if reading his mind, asked him if he really didn't understand why the guy did this. And everything was incredibly simple according to Gonchan. He considered them villains, but he was a fair master. After these words, he asked them to stop chatting and start attacking him, because he was simply tired of waiting for them. At some point, Gonchan noticed that they knew the techniques of the basic school, so he became interested in finding out who they were. But instead of any explanation, the head of this small group immediately ordered his guys to destroy this guy. After a few minutes, it turned out that there were quite a few of them, and Gonchan had to figure out how to deal with them. I didn't have to think long, because Gonchan has an ability in his arsenal called the 5 Seals of Thunder. It allows you to literally turn your enemies 360 degrees, so that they don't think that everything will be so simple. But Gonchan's main problem in this case was the very same leader, who, as it turned out, also possessed some techniques from the school, which made Gonchan's life difficult. At least that was the case for the first few minutes of the battle, but then the guy gathered his strength and was able to respond with a good blow that sent them flying. After a few seconds, it became clear that the guy had gone a bit overboard and destroyed them. But the thought that kept coming back to him was that he had managed to keep his sanity only thanks to training. After which, he turned to the girl he had saved and asked how she was feeling and if everything was okay with her. She replied that everything was fine, and Gonchan couldn't help but notice that she looked pretty strong, as if she had taken out a couple of them herself and ran away. The girl laughed at Gonchan's words and answered him that usually those of hers fly away with one blow. And in general, she thought that she could handle it herself. But before she could finish speaking, she suddenly noticed that Gonchan had started doing something. But as soon as she came closer to him, she immediately realized that he had buried all these guys, which surprised her incredibly. According to Gonchan, he felt very sorry for them, and he was also convinced that everyone deserved peace, no matter how bad people they were. After which he added that it seemed she was injured, and he had a comfortable camp set up nearby, so he invited her to go with him so that he could treat her, although it was impossible to tell from him, but he was actually studying medicine. She immediately noticed that this guy was not like the other masters who behaved terribly. This guy was completely different. On the way to the camp, Gonchan told her that he was from the Jonam clan, which was a little surprising because he looked quite young. It was time to get acquainted, so the guy introduced himself as Gonchan and then asked the girl what her name was. At that moment, she lowered her head and said in a rather quiet voice that her name was Sol Hee. Gonchan didn't understand why she suddenly started speaking so quietly, but he still decided not to pay attention to it, and with his next question, he wanted to know how old Seol Hee was, because it seemed to him that she was the same age as his sister. But as it turned out, Seol Hee was over 30 years old. The guy said that he is now 18, and his sister is 10 years older than him, and as soon as he saw her, he immediately remembered her. After such a conversation, they quickly arrived at the camp, which Gonchan called convenient, but from the looks of it, it was clearly impossible to say so. Sol Hee decided to tell the guy that he is a master and that he simply cannot be lied to. In response to these words, Gonchan stated that he was not lying. According to him, there are no wild animals here, there is fire, and the most beautiful thing is the starry sky above. And on top of all this, he has delicious porridge for dinner. According to the guy, there couldn't be anything more comfortable in the wilderness, so he asked Seol Hee to sit down and enjoy. But as soon as he told her about this, he immediately noticed how bad she felt, and because of this, she fell to the ground and began to choke. But this was only the beginning, because then she began to spit blood, which looked quite scary. It didn't take Gonchan long to realize that the girls had simply been poisoned, which she herself confirmed, because otherwise she would have dealt with the bandits. Immediately after this, the guy asked the girl for her hand, because he urgently needed to check her pulse. She tried to convince him that she was fine and could handle it on her own, but Gonchan couldn't just leave it like that, because he thought her internal organs were damaged, and it wouldn't be easy to deal with the poisoning. But just when he decided to tell her that all this was dangerous, he suddenly saw her emitting strange energy from her body. He immediately saw how she was removing the poison from her body, and this was only possible after 120 years had passed. How was she then capable of such a thing? At the age of 10, Seol Hee was sold to the Hwanggun School, which was famous for its great knowledge of the dark arts. Its followers were able to absorb the energy of yin and yang, and 50 years after its founding, the school fell under the onslaught of enemies, and its founder was wounded by a mace and then died. At that time, Sulhi was only 15 years old. By that time, she had already become a first-class warrior and learned to masterfully draw energy from people, after which many tried to take possession of Huang Song about the dark arts.